Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from Nairobi, and good morning to everyone who is in a different time zone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Balanced Scorecard Institute and Coach Consult. Our webinar today is on balanced strategic planning and management for mission-driven organizations. My name is Angela Naina. I am the founder and managing director at Coach Consult in Nairobi. And my background is in strategic planning, strategy execution, performance management, and KPI development and training. I have experience in working with organizations in government, not-for-profit, and also profit in East Africa, in parts of Southern Africa, such as Malawi and Zambia, and parts of West Africa, such as Ghana. And my experience has been gained from working for organizations, including Deloitte in different countries, Chemonix International, and Balanced Scorecard Eastern Africa. And with me today is my co-host and panelist, Howard, and I'd just like to welcome Howard.
Thank you, Angela. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our presentation. My experience is government service for a couple of decades, business consulting with Booz Allen and Hamilton, and the co-founder of the Balanced Scorecard Institute, and now serving as the president. What we want to do is share some things that we've learned over the last 25 years that we have been working with balanced scorecard systems around the world. So we'll start with some challenges, some things we can do to overcome those challenges. There's a lot of tools and techniques that are available to us as strategic planning and management professionals. We'll share some of those that we've seen work pretty well, and then talk about a disciplined process for sort of putting all the tools and the techniques together to get some results. We have worked in 40 countries and worked with a lot of nonprofit and government agencies, national governments, both on the civilian side and the national defense side, cities, counties, quasi-government agencies, and state governments as well. So it's a pretty good collection of folks that we have gained some experience from. And we pulled from these learnings, both on the training side and on the consulting side. And that's what we're going to share with you today. We partner with George Washington University, the Center for Excellence in Public Leadership. We have certification courses in Balanced Scorecard and KPIs and OKRs, and coming not too distant future strategy execution. We also partner with the Project Management Institute and with the Association for Strategic Planning. For both of those organizations, we're registered education providers authorized to teach and train in those disciplines. So let's talk a little bit about the systems approach to addressing government and mission-driven organization challenges. I'll point out some of the differences when we do this work for private sector versus government and other mission-driven organizations. A lot of what we do in performance management, strategic planning, and performance measurement uses the same principles. As those of you who work for government know, the language is different and the nuances are different and very important when we deal with government and mission-driven programs versus private sector services and projects. So one of the things that we hope to get out of a system with a more balanced approach is to increase the value of programs and the effectiveness of those, the cost effectiveness of our programs and services. And a disciplined approach, a more balanced approach will help you do that. Building accountability for results is an important outcome from a more systematic approach to performance management, strategic planning and performance management. Getting some facts upon which to make decisions, data-driven decision-making, evidence-based decision-making. We'll see examples of these as presentation continues here. A better informed budget process, right? Given that we can get some performance data that we can add into the budget deliberations, that'll make those conversations sharper and more insightful, more knowledgeable. And that's one of the big benefits of having a disciplined approach to developing strategic and operational performance measures. Adding to continuous improvement, that's an important part of any strategic planning and management system, is the feedback loop. What did we learn, right? Are we smarter now as a result of running our management system, and how can we incorporate what we're learning into a continuous improvement mindset? And then finally, aligning the organization around strategy is one of the benefits that we'll get out of a more balanced and disciplined approach. And what we're trying to do is create a more strategy focused organization. You know, that's the simple thread, if you will, through work like this, is to put more effort on the strategy side and make sure that folks are aligned to the strategy of the organization. One of the things that we talk about a lot is connecting the dots. I've been doing strategic planning and management for well over 40 years, and visited probably 60 countries in the world, and benefited from talking to folks in different cultures all over the world. And one of the common things that I've observed on the strategic planning side is what I'll call a lack of connecting the dots. You know, the elements of strategy, the mission, the vision, the values, the customer value proposition, the projects, the goals, these things tend to not connect very well, has been my experience. And so one of the things that we've tried to do over the years is to build some connections, some bridges between what we call the high altitude things, which would be mission and vision, our values, and the more lower altitude things like the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So we tend to think of strategy in a hierarchical sense, starting with mission and vision, right, for a successful future. What is our plan for getting to that vision, that picture of the future, and achieving the mission that we've set for ourselves? How do we align programs and services, the operating units, the business units, the support units, and employees with the strategy and the strategic plan? And then how do we measure our progress along the way? How do we prioritize our work? How do we get important stuff done? So we'll be covering these topics as we go. And there's line of sight. We like to talk about line of sight from what we're trying to accomplish at high altitude, our mission and our vision, and the work that we do on a day-to-day basis that supports that. That's what we mean by connecting the dots. So a key question that we always start with is, well, let me tell you what we don't start with. We don't start with, what are you currently doing? What are the projects that you currently have? What are the programs that you currently have? What are the services that you currently provide? That's the sort of what I call the traditional way of doing strategic planning. We always started with the programs that we were currently running. I spent quite a bit of time in federal government in Washington, D.C. And I recall my days of starting with what we were working on, and then using the goal setting process almost as a way of justifying what we were spending our money on, rather than more strategic inquiry as to what we should be doing. So to us, the key questions start with what Stephen Covey called begin with the end in mind, right? Leadership principle, maybe number 2, if memory serves. What are we trying to accomplish? What does the end look like? Second question is, how will we know success when we see it? And then the third question, key question is, how are we going to monitor and report our success in simple, concrete terms that people understand and can relate to? I will tell you that when we do facilitated workshops and we start with these questions rather than the "what are you currently spending your money on" question, it is a different conversation. By keeping your eye on the prize, translating the vision into action, starting at high altitude and working down to lower altitude, is very refreshing for the organizations that go through a process like this, because it's not the traditional way of thinking about things. So what you're going to find if you adopt an approach like this is there'll be a lot of high energy in the organization, because folks will recognize this as a new way of thinking about things, and that's very refreshing to most folks. So one of the things that we're going to cover in this presentation is developing meaningful KPIs. How will we know success when we see it? That's a KPI question, right? And what are we trying to accomplish, is the strategy question. And then how will we monitor is the performance reporting question. And a lot of the questions that you folks have asked in advance of this webinar are around KPI development, and a lot of questions around how do we use a balanced scorecard in a government and a mission-driven nonprofit setting. So we'll address those. I'm going to stop sharing, and Angela, if you will pick up, please.
Okay. Thank you, Howard. So one of the things that we find when we are working with organizations to build a balanced strategy and build a balanced organization is that there is a need for change, and change in the way people think, the way people behave. And that change needs to happen so that there is transformation taking place and therefore leading to performance. And so one of the things that we start looking at is really asking the question, what is it that needs to change and why? And what are the answers to those questions, and thinking through that. And then the second thing that needs to be in place that we look at is how do we create a guiding coalition? So with the leadership team, the management team, is there a coalition that is leading this effort of change so that employees and the workforce are aligned and are moving together? And to do that, the first starting point really is starting with creating a picture of what does success look like. So Howard has mentioned what does success look like. So creating that picture at the beginning becomes critical so that people can understand what success will look like, and communicating what that picture is, and continuing that communication throughout. And then developing a clear roadmap. When we have a clear roadmap in place, then everyone in the organization understands where we're going, why the change is necessary, and what the expected transformation is that will lead to improved performance. And critical and important is, how will we know that we succeeded? How do we measure? And this is where the performance measures come in. So changing people's mindsets and behaviors becomes critical as part of the process of developing the balanced strategy or the balanced organization. Here we have an illustration of how we think of strategy. And we think of strategy from an altitude perspective. And strategy really encompasses a number of things. And we're starting from the top. What we have in front of us here looks like a pyramid. And at the top, we start by really understanding what are our customer needs, our stakeholder needs, and our market needs. And then to begin thinking about the strategy, we then focus on a number of components which are critical. And these are really the first 5: the mission, the vision, the perspectives, the strategic themes and results, and the strategic objectives and strategy maps. And these are the 5 components that are important when we are look at when we're really going through the strategy formulation process. When we work with organizations, and this is attributable to both public sector, government, and mission-driven organizations. We look at it from the point of building a balanced organization is a lot like building a custom house. And when you're building a custom house, you need the right materials, the right equipment, the right people, the right tools, the right technology. And these have to come together at the right time. And so when we look at building a balanced organization, all these pieces have to come together because they connect to one another. And so looking at this illustration here, we begin by looking at the rooftop. And at the roof, this is where we look at the strategic elements, the high-level strategic elements. And then we come down, lower down in terms of the house. And the strategic results are the lintel of the house. And that is where we're really defining what does success look like? What will be the outcomes? And then each house, every custom house has a pillar. And strategic themes form the pillar. We can look at pillars as, say, the walls of the house. And these are really the high-level strategies that will help deliver on the strategic results. On the left-hand side, we have the perspectives, and perspectives are really like the floors, and these are the lenses that we use to look at the organization or look through the organization and focusing on different areas: customer, financial stewardship, or financial stewardship. In the case of mission-driven organizations, we look at stewardship, internal processes, and organizational capacity. But critical to any custom house is the foundation. And the foundation is where we have the elements that are necessary for change to happen so that the strategy is successful and we're building balance across the organization. And I just want to invite Howard just to tell us a bit more about this term balanced.
Yeah, I think, a key question is, what do we mean by balance? Going back a couple of decades when Drs. Kaplan and Norton at Harvard created the Balance Scorecard, they defined balance as balancing short and long-term interests of private businesses, private corporations, balancing financial and non-financial aspects, balancing leading and lagging performance measures, and balancing the emphasis on internal considerations versus external. I think over the last couple of decades, a couple of more elements of balance have come to the front when we talk about balanced organizations. For example, the balance between strategy and operations, right? Taking what we have created on the strategy side and making sure that the operational side of the business, the keeping the trains running on time part, is consistent, is supporting of the organization strategy. An emphasis on balancing the interest of customers and stakeholders and employees has had more prominence over the years. The difference between long-term stability and short-term agility has come into focus even more in the last couple of years as a result of what we've all been going through. And then finally, more emphasis on what's popularly called the triple bottom line, an emphasis on people, on profits, and on the environment or the planet.
And so I'm going to take you through a couple of tools that we use to help create this balanced strategy, this balanced organization. And these tools apply both to government and to mission-driven institutions. And you're probably familiar with this list of tools. This is a list. It's tools, it's techniques that you may be familiar with. And this is to demonstrate that all of these tools can be used in the process of developing that balanced strategy or creating that balance within the organization. So I'm going to just highlight a couple, and I'll start with the strategy profile. The strategy profile is a tool that helps the organization to create or rather compare the various attributes in the organization with other organizations and also with best practice. Then there's a second tool, which is the customer value proposition. And this is about determining how do we create value through the eyes of our stakeholders. The strategy map is another very useful tool, and the strategy map, and we'll look at that in a moment, really helps to the organization to communicate clearly, communicate the strategy clearly, show how alignment is created, and also that communication is taking place both internally and externally. Another tool is the balanced KPI development. Howard has talked about KPIs a little bit, but the balanced KPI development tool really helps to measure what matters. So we find a lot of the times when we work with organizations, both across Africa and in Europe and America, is that there's a focus, we want to measure what's easy rather than measure what matters. And so this tool helps us to focus on what's important and measure what matters. The other tool is the balanced scorecard tool, which really helps with, again, focusing on the strategy, helping create that alignment, helping improve communication across the board, and focusing on the important things. And the final tool here that I'll talk about is the Cascading Strategy tool. And this tool helps us, and we've used it many times, where organizations have come up with their overall strategy at the corporate level or the tier 1 level, and they want to cascade or translate that strategy down across the organization to lower levels. And this tool helps us look at how do we create that alignment and how do we ensure that with the alignment, there is performance resulting as people understand how they contribute to the strategy. So selected tools that are useful. And I'll take a bit of time just to focus on one of the tools, which is the strategy canvas or the strategic performance profile. You may have seen this used before, but the strategy profile is very useful. It was developed by Shan Kim and Renee Mogwen a couple of years ago. And typically what the strategy canvas or the strategy profile does is that it helps the organization, mission-driven government organizations, to really craft a strategy, a winning strategy that allows focus on the market, focus on the services that are being provided, and identify the things that will differentiate the organization so that they can compete and succeed, or serve and succeed. And so in the context of our mission-driven organization or our government organization, it really helps us to focus on what do we need to differentiate or focus on so that we can achieve excellence in service and excellence in the delivery of our mission. The other thing that the profile helps us to do is, and what we've seen is that in addition to differentiating, is really creating a strategy where people understand and can communicate it. The example on the screen is a private sector example, but still applies in the context of identifying differentiators. So Southwest Airlines, an airline based in North America, was going through a tough time, and they needed to identify the key things that would differentiate them in the delivery of their services and in the airline industry. And so they focused on 3 things. And the 3 things were lowering their prices, so making tickets very affordable, providing a friendly service, and ensuring that they had quick turnaround times. When they landed when they landed and needed to take off, the turnaround time was very quick and very efficient. So when we're looking at the organization, the need to identify what differentiates us as a mission-driven organization or as government serving citizens, the strategy profile or the strategy canvas is a good tool to use, and we've seen it work across many organizations. Another tool that we have used and is very good and leads to a very good way of going through strategic thinking and discovery is a tool where we begin, that brings information together. So we begin by really looking at what do we have in terms of our mission, our vision, and our core values. What are we looking at in terms of our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? What is our environment? What is going on in our environment, internally and externally? And what other assumptions do we need to make? And then looking at what are our customers or citizens saying they need, and what's our value proposition to them? And so all that information is brought together into a process of discovery where we discover and come up with clear strategies that will help us deliver on the direction that the organization is trying to get to. And so it's important to go through this, to use this tool and to go through this process as we're going through the process of strategic thinking. And really, it's almost a starting point in terms of strategic thinking. When we've been able to accomplish the strategic thinking and discovery process, and that process involves different people in the organization, so leaders, managers. It's important to get them involved in the process so that they can also contribute and create. You also create the buy-in. But this leads us to another tool, which is the strategy map. And the strategy map really helps us to, and helps the organization to create, to visualize what are the links between the various objectives that we are pursuing. And so on the screen here, we have a strategy map. It outlines the perspectives or the lenses that the organization is using. And there are 4 perspectives, and this is for government, again, and mission-driven organizations, where the focus is on the constituent or the stakeholder or the citizen. And then there's financial stewardship, internal process, and organizational capacity. And in each of these perspectives are specific objectives, and the objectives tell us what are the continuous improvement activities that we need to undertake. And with that, we're able to tell a story based on a cause and effect relationship. And so the arrows create that story for the organization using this strategy map tool, which makes it very easy to communicate the strategy on one page. So let's look a bit more, let's go into this a little bit more. And I want to demonstrate to you how we have been able to take the strategy, once it's been crafted, it's clear in terms of what our picture of success looks like, the objectives that we want to pursue, but translating that into specific desired outcomes. So on the screen here, we have a strategy map for an organization with very clear objectives. And the next thing becomes, how do we communicate these objectives? What do they mean? How do we translate the strategy into actionable components? And so we start with defining or describing what the objective is about. And once we've understood, what are we trying to do here? If it's increasing efficiency and reliability of services, what does this mean? Is it clear? And with this objective, what is our desired end income? What do we want to see in terms of end state? And it's important to describe the end state, because the end state is what will success look like when we've achieved this objective. So that intended result, as we call it, needs to be clearly articulated. We then are able to come up with the performance measures that will tell us how we're delivering on our objectives, specific targets, and the initiatives that will help to deliver or drive the delivery of the objectives. Earlier, we mentioned measurement. And what we find is that when we work with organizations, the aspect of performance measures is a conversation that comes up many times and is critical to people understanding how to measure success. And there are different types of measures or key performance indicators that are used to measure the progress towards that intended result. We find a lot of organizations have a lot of operational measures and a mix of project measures, employee measures, risk measures. And some of these measures tend to be focused on outputs, so output measures. But it's also very important for us to focus on outcome measures, which are really the strategic measures that will tell us whether we're getting to that picture of success and whether we're delivering the results for that balanced strategy or that balanced organization. Measures are linked to intended results. And I think it's important just to remember that when we help and we work with organizations, is when we're looking at developing KPIs, we always link the KPI to the intended result. And one of the things that we find is important and comes up in the process is understanding leading and lagging KPIs. And a leading indicator is an indicator of performance that's a precursor of future success. A lagging indicator, on the other hand, is an indicator of past performance that shows how successful we are in achieving results. But to be able to identify a KPI, we need to remember that we must have the desired outcome. And so here, in this example here, this is an organization that had a desired outcome of reducing incidence of disease and reduced costs of medical care in the health sector. And one of the indicators that they had identified was the number of smoking cessation programs held. Now, this is a leading indicator. It's fairly easy to measure. But they also had another indicator, which was the percentage of population that smokes. And this indicator is more of an outcome measure, because it's also measuring outcomes and impact. But also, these measures also led to them understanding, and this is one of the things that they needed to understand here, is what are the rates of cancer? And so cancer rates here become a lagging measure because they indicate where the organization is in terms of getting to the desired outcome. So when we're developing KPIs, what we find is that we may have, or an organization may have a mix of lagging and leading indicators. And it's just important to understand the relationships and the differences between the leading and lagging and between the outcome and output measures. So with a tool on measures, on how to develop measures, the other tool that we use, and we found that when we worked with organizations, a lot of organizations have several initiatives. So we've gone into organizations and found they have a list of projects, up to maybe 100 projects. Everybody's trying to deliver on a project. But the question then becomes, which project is important and why? Or which initiative is important and why? And so we help organizations to identify or bring all of these initiatives together and identify what is it that we want to focus on? What is it that is important? And so this tool really focuses on helping the organization identify the initiatives that link to the strategy. So we come up with a bucket of initiatives or a list of initiatives that the organization has. And then we say, with all these initiatives, and we call them candidate initiatives, let's take them through a filtration process with specific criteria. And some of the criteria that we apply includes, what's the potential impact of this initiative on the strategy? How long will it take to implement this initiative? What will it cost? What resources are required? And so with that filter and that criteria, then we are able to prioritize which initiatives can be funded, which initiatives can we focus on. And so that allows the organization to just select a few and focus on a few important ones that can be well resourced, funded, and also have high impact. The last tool that I'd like to just speak about here is the cascading tool. When we've developed strategy within organizations, a lot of the time, sometimes we find that the strategy is developed at the top, which is our tier one. There's a very clear strategy amongst the leadership team, but the strategy needs to be translated to lower levels. And so the process of cascading and the cascading tools allows that top level strategy, the tier one level strategy, to be translated to tier two, which is where we have divisions or departments or business units, depending on the organization. And then it's further translated down to teams and individuals, so that then, starting from the bottom at tier three, people understand, how are we aligned to the top? What will performance look like if we perform at tier three level or at tier two level? So the cascading process really helps to create that alignment. And with alignment, then comes performance. Because if people are aligned, we find that they're able to perform because they understand where the organization is going and how they contribute to different aspects of performance within the organization.
One of the points on the last slide was the emphasis on cascading strategy rather than cascading performance measures or projects. And if you want to maintain a strategy focus in the organization, maintaining that conversation about what are we trying to accomplish is really important, rather than just what are we trying to measure. And the way to do that is to keep talking about the strategic objectives, translating a strategic objective at the enterprise-wide level. What does it mean to my department? What does it mean to my support unit? And then what does it mean to individual employees in terms of their personal goals? We've put all the tools that Angela has shared with you into a framework, and it's called the 9 Steps to Success Balanced Scorecard Framework. And we've used this now for close to 25 years. We wrote about it in a book called The Institute Way. And basically, it is a logical way of connecting the dots so that you can go from an assessment in step one, and the outputs that you get from doing the pestle analysis, the SWOT analysis, the market analysis, the environmental assessment, all of those outputs that become the input to the conversation about strategy and strategic themes, which then translate into objectives, and then the strategy map, and then developing the measures and the initiatives around the objectives. So at the end of step 6, you end up with what we call a balanced strategic plan. It's a plan that's been derived from high altitude mission, vision, and values, and is based on what the organization is trying to accomplish. It's also the start of a full system, a full management system. So those first 6 steps lead you into analyzing performance, reporting back results, aligning the organization, and then doing an evaluation step to see, number one, how's the balanced scorecard performing? But more importantly, how is your strategy performing? That then will lead you into the next planning cycle. A couple of examples of what it looks like. This is called a 1-page balanced strategic plan. Call it an executive summary of your strategy. This is some work we did for the United Nations, for UNICEF. It's based on that. Vision and mission at the top, strategic themes, right? And 3 rather than 6 or 8 or 10. We've seen an awful lot of organizations that seem to have too many goals. They'll set 6 goals, 8 goals, 10 goals. What we have found is that if you focus on 3 or 4 significant ones, pillars of excellence, if you will, of your organization, it's much easier to manage strategy with fewer things than it is with a lot of things. So we tend to try and limit the conversation when we facilitate these sessions to 3 or 4 high-level strategic themes. We call them strategic results then, you might call them strategic goals. There's not universal truth among us professionals in our profession on what words mean. So one of the things we've learned the hard way is that you should adopt a dictionary at the start of a process like this. And we advise folks you don't have to use our definitions, but make sure that you do adopt some common definitions. We have seen examples all over the world where we're talking to senior executives and they're talking about goals, goals, and goals. And we can literally go across the hall and talk to a department and they're talking about objectives. And it takes you a while to realize that they're both talking about the same thing. So I can tell you that if my goal is your objective, we're going to have a hard time creating a strategy that other people will understand. So get agreement on your terms before you start a process like this would be one recommendation. So 3 or 4 strategic themes. The strategic results are like the intended results that Angela talked about. We write them in end state language, right? Assuming we are successful, what do we want that goal statement or that result statement to read like? The strategy map with strategic objectives is really about the value proposition for your organization. It's a graphic picture of how you create value at a high level, right? And what's important in a continuous improvement sense in how you're going to create value. In this case, reducing child poverty is the end outcome, the desired end outcome of this organization. So then we can put measures on each of the objectives, typically 1, 2, or 3. One of the desired outcomes of running a process like this, a balanced scorecard, is to reduce the number of measures you have, not increase the number of measures. We want to find the measures that matter, not all the ones that we can collect if we sit around a conference room table and say, what should we measure? That's the wrong question. The question is, again, what are we trying to accomplish? How will we recognize success when we see it? And then what measures should we use on the strategy, the operations, the project, the risk, and the employee side, the types of measures that Angela talked about, that will help inform choices that we have made and are going to make. Measures lead us to targets, and then the initiatives are what we call gap-filling projects to try and move the performance needle within a particular strategic objective so that we can show progress in the next reporting period. For government, this is based on some work we did for the city of Newark, New Jersey in North America, when Senator Cory Booker was the mayor. Again, 4 strategic themes this time, not 6 or 8 or 10. Strategic results, and the end outcome of this organization was to increase the quality of life for the citizens of the city. But the same logic holds for all of the balanced scorecard examples, is to present a picture of the elements that connect together to create a picture of a desirable future, what we're all working towards. I think we'll wrap up here. I think a couple of minutes for questions. We have been doing this for a couple of decades now, and on the consulting side, the facilitation side, certification training programs, remote the last couple of years. We're hoping to get back to live classes shortly. We've been doing these all over the world. We have taught and trained in 7 languages, Arabic, Vietnamese, Spanish, Portuguese, and French, in addition to English. And we're also just establishing some strong responses for the SMO, PMO, establishing those organizations on the strategy execution side, and process improvement as well. So those are the kinds of things that we help organizations with. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've learned some new things. There's a lot of tools out there. I've worked, I tell people, somebody did an inventory of the number of management systems, budget systems, performance management systems, performance measurement systems, and the number was up over 80. And I tell people, I'm embarrassed to tell you that I've probably worked on 35 of them over the course of my career. When we saw the balanced scorecard, that clearly was had components that the other systems didn't. So we have improved on the original balanced scorecard, we think, by doing the government version of it, the mission-driven version of it. The original work was all for the private sector. And it's important to to look at the specific organization and build a system and a strategic plan that's unique for that organization. So do we have some questions, Angela, that we can share, or Candace? Let me see if I look.
Yes, Howard, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section.
Okay.
And maybe I'll just start by addressing one or two. There's some questions here related to cascading BSC. And one of the questions is cascading the balanced scorecard without aligning with individual job descriptions effective? And I think the answer to this question is that it's important to have the individual job descriptions documented and available, because there are critical job functions that are included in those job descriptions. And so that becomes an input in the cascading process, particularly when we get to tier 3 of the cascading process. The second question related to that is, somebody has asked, what are the different colors in the bubbles in the cascading to the workforce? And the different colors represent the different perspectives. So really showing if the bubble is purple, then which perspective does it align to within the scorecard? So different colors are applied to make it easier to understand and translate.
All right, let's see if there's any more questions here. What differentiates the balanced scorecard from the 80 other companies? I think maybe the question would be from the other management frameworks that are out there. The big difference for most of them is the idea of using perspectives, looking at strategy through the lens of financial performance, through the lens of customer satisfaction, through the lens of process improvement, and through the lens of what Kaplan and Norton called learning and growth. We've expanded on that to call it organizational capacity, to pick up some more things other than just the human capital side of it, the technology, the innovation, the infrastructure, and sort of the rules and regulations that you're operating under. So I think that's one of the real big differences. Adding the strategy map is a tool. One of the great contributions in the last couple of decades, in my opinion, to be able to have people visualize what it is that they're trying to accomplish is really huge. It's a game changer. I think the way we have developed KPIs in a disciplined, structured way is different than a lot of the organizations, or I mean, than a lot of the management systems that have come before it. But I also say, going back all the way to management by objectives, back in the 60s and 70s when I worked on them, if you look at the continuous improvement objectives that we have defined in our version of the balanced scorecard, a lot of folks don't put continuous improvement in their objectives. So that's a big difference. Back in the day, and I was working in government, we got direction to use management by objectives to look at our programs. So I remember we started with the objectives, and we wrote our program descriptions to match the objectives. So look how far we've come with the objectives being derived from strategic themes and results, and then used as a as another tool, as an input to another tool, if you will, or another technique in the process of trying to take high level, here's what we're trying to accomplish at 10,000 meters, and translate it into what it means at sea level, right? What does it mean for the rest of us down at the shop floor or at our desktops? That's really, one of the big benefits of a process like this. I'd say the other thing is that differentiates the current version of the balanced scorecard from the others is the incorporation of change management. One of the things I learned the hard way was that you can't just get a group of smart folks and go off to a resort on a weekend, write a strategic plan, arrive Monday morning and expect everybody to follow you. It didn't work very well 20, 30 years ago, and it doesn't work at all very well today. And that's why we built into each one of the steps. John Cotter's change management work, also at Harvard. And, build a coalition of the willing, for example, when we facilitate, we bring different voices of the organization together, not just the senior leadership team. We want to start building buy-in to change and innovation and agility and new direction, transformation on day one, not hand this off to the HR department on day 50 when we've finished building the plan. So there's some really substantive differences between the current version of the balanced scorecard and the way we used to do things with other frameworks. Maybe another big one is the integration of, finding the tools and techniques that work together to give you a better whole than any one of the individual tools will give you as standalones. Angela, any other questions?
We have several. We're also looking at the time, but there's a question on can this be applied to a school? Is balanced scorecard feasible applied at school organization? The answer to that is yes, it can be applied to different institutions.
We've applied it, excuse me, Angela, at the university level, at the high school level, and Atlantic Public School System, for example, and Concordia University, Purdue, a number of others. So it's a very common tool for higher education and for middle schools as well, any school district, absolutely. Language is different, right? But and the outcome, right? We want students to succeed, and then again work backwards from that. That determines what your objectives are and your themes and so on. Always start with the end in mind.
We have several other questions, and what we're going to do is we do appreciate all the questions that are here, and we'd like to answer these questions specifically. So we will be responding to each one outside of the webinar, just to make sure that you get the answers that you need. And I think at this point, I'd just like to thank everyone who has logged into the webinar, and thank you for participating, for being here. And I'll just hand back to Howard to close.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've had, I think, as I understand it, over 800 folks sign up. So it's very appreciate your interest in this and giving us a chance to share some world experiences on what works and some things that we've seen that don't work as well. So stay in touch, and if we can help you in any way, we'd be happy to do so. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.